Would you marry a man you'd never met if it meant escaping a life that was slowly killing your soul? That was the question Charlotte Whitmore asked herself as she clutched the worn letter in her trembling hands, standing on the platform of the railway station in the remote territory of Montana. The autumn wind whipped through the valley, carrying with it the scent of pine and the promise of an early winter that would soon blanket the land in snow. She had traveled over 1,000 miles to reach this place, and there was no turning back now. She had nothing left to lose. Charlotte's journey to this desolate outpost began 3 months earlier in the bustling city of Boston. Her life had shattered in a single evening when Mr. Ashford cornered her in the library, his breath reeking of brandy, his hands reaching for her with drunken entitlement. The incident itself lasted only minutes, but its consequences would follow her forever. She had fought him off, pressing her back against the mahogany bookshelf until the leather-bound volumes dug into her spine, but she knew her position was now impossible. Mrs. Ashford would never believe her word over her husband's, and Charlotte had no family to turn to, no references that would secure her another position. Within days, she was dismissed without cause, her meager savings barely enough for a week's lodging. She searched every respectable household in Boston, begged for any position that would preserve her dignity, but whispers followed her like shadows. A governess dismissed without references was damaged goods, and no family would risk their reputation on such uncertainty. The only offers came from establishments that made her stomach turn, work that would destroy what remained of her soul. Charlotte refused. She would starve before she sold herself to such degradation. By the end of the month, she was sleeping in a cramped boarding house room with 3 other desperate women, counting coins that dwindled with each passing day. The room smelled of unwashed bodies and broken dreams, and Charlotte lay awake each night listening to the quiet sobs of her roommates. Each morning brought fresh rejections, and each evening her hope grew thinner. Then, in a newspaper left behind by another lodger, she found salvation in the form of an advertisement that would change everything. Respectable gentleman seeks wife for companionship and partnership in the Montana territory. Must be of good character and willing to embrace frontier life. Correspondence welcomed. The advertisement was signed by one Duke Nathaniel Blackwood, and something in the formal yet sincere tone stirred hope in Charlotte's weary heart. She had heard stories of mail-order brides, women who traveled west to marry men they had never met, seeking new lives and fresh starts. Most people spoke of such arrangements with disdain, calling them desperate measures for desperate women. But Charlotte was desperate, and she had nothing left to lose. With her last coins, she purchased paper and ink, and that very night she penned her first letter by candlelight. She wrote honestly about her education, her desire for a life of purpose and respect, carefully omitting the shameful circumstances of her dismissal. She did not mention love. Such romantic notions seemed foolish for a woman in her position. But deep in her heart, she harbored a secret hope that perhaps, in time, affection might grow between them. Duke's response arrived 2 weeks later, and Charlotte's hands shook as she broke the wax seal. His handwriting was strong and clear, his words measured but kind. He wrote of his ranch in the Montana territory, of the vast sky and endless grasslands, of his need for a partner who could help him build something lasting in that wild country. He asked about her dreams, her fears, her willingness to leave behind everything familiar for an uncertain future. Their correspondence continued throughout the summer, each letter drawing her deeper into the life Duke described. He wrote of sunrise over the mountains, of cattle drives and harsh winters, of the satisfaction that came from working the land with his own hands. He had been a soldier in the war, he told her, and had come west seeking peace and purpose. But it was not his descriptions of the land that captured Charlotte's heart, it was the man himself who emerged from his careful words. Duke Blackwood was thoughtful and intelligent, a man who read books by lamplight and spoke of building schools and churches in their growing community. By September, when Duke sent money for passage west and a formal proposal of marriage, Charlotte knew she had found something she had never dared hope for. Not just escape from her current circumstances, but the possibility of a true partnership with a man who valued her mind as well as her domestic skills. The journey west had been grueling. Charlotte traveled by train for days, watching the landscape change from crowded cities to endless prairies. She shared cramped quarters with other travelers, ate stale bread and questionable meat, and slept sitting upright in uncomfortable seats. But with each mile that passed, she felt herself shedding the constraints of her old life like a snake shedding its skin. Now, as she stood on the platform in the fading afternoon light, Charlotte searched the faces of the men gathered near the station. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she wondered if she would recognize the man who had become so important to her through their letters. Would he be disappointed by her appearance? Would she find in his eyes the kindness she had imagined, or would she discover that his written words had been mere politeness? A tall figure emerged from the crowd, moving with the confident stride of a man accustomed to command. Even before he spoke, Charlotte knew this was Duke Blackwood. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, his face weathered by sun and wind, his blue eyes sharp and assessing. He was older than she had expected, perhaps 40 to her 26 years, but there was a strength in his bearing that made her feel suddenly, inexplicably safe. "Miss Whitmore," quote, his voice was deep and warm, matching the tone she had imagined when reading his letters. "Yes," quote, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise of the departing train. Duke stepped closer, his eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her cheeks burn. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, two strangers who had shared their deepest thoughts through ink and paper, now meeting in flesh and blood. Charlotte noticed the way his hands, calloused from ranch work, held his hat with surprising gentleness. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of long days under the Montana sun, but also of laughter she had yet to witness. "Welcome to Montana," quote, he said finally, and Charlotte heard something in his voice that made her heart leap with hope. Not disappointment, not mere politeness, but genuine warmth that seemed to wrap around her like a protective cloak. As he reached for her worn carpetbag, their fingers brushed, and Charlotte felt a spark of possibility that had nothing to do with convenience or desperation. His touch was brief but steady, and she found herself wondering what it would be like to know this man, not just through carefully composed letters, but through the thousand small intimacies of shared daily life. "My wagon is just over there," quote, Duke said, gesturing toward a sturdy buckboard hitched to two strong horses. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch. I hope you're not too tired from your journey." Charlotte shook her head, though exhaustion weighed on her shoulders like a heavy shawl. "I'm quite well, thank you. I'm eager to see my new home." The word home hung in the air between them, carrying with it all the weight of her hopes and fears. As Duke helped her up onto the wagon seat, Charlotte caught a glimpse of the vast Montana landscape stretching endlessly before them. Mountains rose like sleeping giants against a darkening sky, and somewhere among those peaks lay her future, uncertain, but filled with more promise than anything she had known in years. As the wagon rolled away from the station, Charlotte stole glances at the man beside her, this stranger who would soon be her husband. Duke Blackwood sat with easy confidence, his capable hands guiding the horses with practiced skill. When he caught her looking, he offered a small smile that transformed his withered features, and Charlotte felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with nervousness. Perhaps, in this wild country, she might find not just survival, but the love she had always secretly yearned for. The thought both thrilled and terrified her as the wagon carried them deeper into the Montana wilderness, toward whatever destiny awaited them both. The wagon crested a small hill, and Charlotte's breath caught in her throat as Duke's ranch spread out before them in the gathering dusk. The main house stood solid and welcoming against the backdrop of towering mountains, its windows glowing with warm lamplight that promised refuge from the growing chill. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney, and Charlotte could see the silhouettes of several outbuildings scattered across the property, a large barn, what appeared to be a bunkhouse, and various smaller structures she couldn't identify in the fading light. "There she is," quote, Duke said quietly, his voice carrying a note of pride that made Charlotte glance at his profile. "The Blackwood Ranch. Been building it up for the past 8 years." Charlotte studied the scene before her with new eyes, trying to imagine herself as part of this rugged landscape. The ranch was larger than she had expected, but there was something about the vastness of the surrounding wilderness that made her feel suddenly small and vulnerable. Mountains rose on all sides like ancient sentinels, their peaks already dusted with snow that gleamed silver in the moonlight. "It's beautiful," quote, she said softly, and meant it, though the isolation was more complete than anything she had ever experienced. As they approached the main house, two men emerged from the barn. The first was an older gentleman with silver hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades under the Montana sun. The second was younger, with dark skin and kind eyes, his hat pushed back to reveal graying temples. "Miguel, old Pete," quote, Duke called out as he brought the wagon to a stop. "Come meet my bride-to-be, Miss Charlotte Whitmore." The older man, Pete, removed his hat and offered a gap-toothed grin. "Pleasure to meet you, miss. Been wondering when the boss would finally bring home a lady to civilize this place." Miguel stepped forward with more reserved courtesy, his English careful but clear. "Welcome to the ranch, señorita. We are very happy you have come." Charlotte felt a flutter of nervousness at being the center of attention, but she managed a warm smile. "Thank you both. I'm pleased to meet you." Duke helped her down from the wagon, and Charlotte was grateful for his steady hand as her legs, stiff from the long journey, nearly buckled beneath her. "Pete's been with me since the beginning," quote, Duke explained. "Miguel joined us 3 years ago. They keep this place running when I'm away on business." "Away on business?" Quote, Charlotte asked, realizing how little she truly knew about the practical aspects of Duke's life. Cattle drives, mostly, quote, Duke said, lifting her carpet bag from the wagon. Sometimes I have to travel to Denver or even back east to arrange sales. The ranch doesn't run itself, and winter's coming fast. We'll need to make some hard decisions soon. There was something in his tone that made Charlotte look at him more closely, but before she could ask what he meant, Duke was already leading her toward the house. The interior of the main house was spartanly furnished but clean and well maintained. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, with a simple wooden table and chairs nearby. Bookshelves lined one wall, a sight that made Charlotte's heart lift with unexpected joy. She had feared that intellectual conversation would be impossible in such a remote place. Your room is just down the hall, quote, Duke said, leading her past a small kitchen toward the back of the house. I thought you'd prefer privacy while we get to know each other better. He opened a door to reveal a modest but comfortable room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window that looked out toward the mountains. The quilt on the bed was clearly handmade, its pattern simple but skillfully executed. It's perfect, quote, Charlotte said, setting down her reticule on the washstand. Thank you. Duke lingered in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Dinner will be ready in about an hour. Nothing fancy, Miguel does most of the cooking, and he's better with beef and beans than anything you might be used to. Charlotte turned to face him, lifting her chin slightly. Mr. Blackwood, I hope you don't think me so delicate that I require elaborate meals. I've learned to be grateful for simple food and honest work. Something shifted in Duke's expression, surprise, perhaps, or approval. I'm glad to hear it. This country has a way of testing people, especially as winter approaches. When Duke left her alone, Charlotte sank onto the edge of the bed and looked around her new quarters. The room was clean and functional, but it felt foreign in a way that made her chest tighten with homesickness. Through the small window, she could see nothing but darkness and the faint outline of mountains against the star-filled sky. The silence was profound, no city sounds, no voices from neighboring rooms, just the whisper of wind through the pines. An hour later, Charlotte joined Duke at the simple wooden table for their first meal together. Miguel had prepared a hearty stew with fresh bread, and despite her earlier words about simple food, Charlotte found herself struggling with the unfamiliar spices and the coarser texture of frontier cooking. Tell me about your ranch, quote, she said, hoping conversation would ease the awkwardness. How did you come to settle here? Quote, Duke's fork paused halfway to his mouth. I came west after the war. Needed somewhere quiet, somewhere I could build something with my own hands. His voice carried a weight that suggested painful memories. I'd seen enough of what men could do to each other. Wanted to see what they could build instead. You were a soldier, quote, officer in the Union Army. Saw action at Gettysburg, Antietam. He set down his fork and looked directly at her. I don't talk much about those days, Charlotte. I hope you can understand that. Charlotte nodded, sensing the deep well of experience behind his words. Of course. We all have parts of our past we'd rather leave buried. Duke studied her face carefully. What about you? Your letters mentioned working as a governess, but there was something you weren't telling me. Charlotte's cheeks burned, and she looked down at her plate. I was dismissed from my position. There was an incident with my employer. Nothing I did wrong, but... She trailed off, unable to find words that wouldn't sound like excuses. A man who couldn't keep his hands to himself. Quote, Duke's voice was quiet but edged with steel. Charlotte's eyes flew to his face, surprised by his understanding. Yes. Then you did nothing wrong, quote, Duke said firmly. And any man who would blame you for another's misconduct isn't worth your concern. The simple acceptance in his words brought tears to Charlotte's eyes, and she had to look away to compose herself. Thank you, quote, she whispered. They finished the meal in more comfortable silence, but as Duke walked her back to her room, Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that both of them were still holding back, still measuring and assessing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she was determined to prove herself worthy of the chance Duke had given her. Good night, Charlotte, quote, Duke said softly as he paused at her door. Good night, quote, she replied, and as she closed the door behind her, Charlotte wondered if she would ever truly feel at home in this vast, beautiful, and unforgiving land. The first weeks at the Blackwood Ranch tested Charlotte in ways she had never imagined. Her hands, once soft from indoor work, quickly became rough and calloused from hauling water, feeding chickens, and attempting to master the wood-burning stove that seemed determined to either refuse to light or belch smoke into the kitchen. The trick is to get the kindling just right, quote, Miguel explained patiently as Charlotte stood before another failed fire, her face streaked with soot. Too much and it smothers, too little and it dies. Charlotte wiped her hands on her apron, leaving dark smudges on the fabric. I'm beginning to think this stove has a personal vendetta against me. Miguel chuckled. Give it time, senorita. Everything here takes time to learn. Her attempts at frontier cooking proved equally challenging. The first batch of biscuits emerged from the oven resembling charcoal lumps, and her attempt at preserving vegetables for winter resulted in a mess that even the ranch dogs refused to touch. But Charlotte persisted, driven by a determination to prove herself worthy of Duke's faith in her. Duke himself watched her struggles with quiet patience, offering guidance when asked, but never making her feel incompetent. During evening meals, he would share stories of his early days on the ranch, when he had burned more meals than he had successfully prepared. The first winter nearly did me in, quote, he admitted one evening as they sat by the fireplace after dinner. I was so proud, thought I could figure everything out on my own. Nearly starved before old Pete showed up and taught me the basics. Charlotte looked up from the sock she was mending, another skill she was slowly mastering. What made you stay? When things got so difficult? Quote, Duke stared into the fire, his expression thoughtful. The silence, I suppose. After years of cannon fire and screaming, the quiet here felt like a gift. And the land. He gestured toward the window where moonlight painted the mountains silver. It doesn't judge you. Doesn't care about your past mistakes. It just asks you to work hard and be honest. These evening conversations became precious to Charlotte. Away from the demands of daily labor, Duke revealed glimpses of the man behind the reserved exterior. He spoke of books he had read, dreams of building schools for the scattered ranch families, and his hope that someday the territory would become a proper state. Charlotte found herself sharing more than she had intended: her love of literature, her dreams of teaching, even her secret fear that she would never be strong enough for this harsh life. Duke listened without judgment, and gradually, Charlotte began to feel something she had never experienced before. The comfort of being truly known by another person. The moment that changed everything came on a crisp October morning when old Pete's horse spooked during a cattle roundup. Charlotte heard the commotion from the house and rushed outside to find Pete on the ground, his leg bent at an unnatural angle, while panicked cattle scattered across the pasture. Without thinking, Charlotte ran to Pete's side while Duke and Miguel worked to control the herd. The old cowboy was conscious but pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. Don't try to move, quote, Charlotte said firmly, her governess training taking over. Duke. We need to get him inside. Quote, she helped fashion a splint from fence boards and torn petticoats, her hands steady despite her racing heart. When Duke returned, he found Charlotte calmly directing the operation, having already sent Miguel to fetch the doctor from town. You did good, miss, quote, Pete whispered as they carried him into the house. Real good. That evening, as they sat vigil by Pete's bedside, Duke looked at Charlotte with new respect. Where did you learn to handle an emergency like that? Quote, the Ashford children were always getting into scrapes, quote, Charlotte replied. I learned basic medical care out of necessity. She paused, then added quietly, I'm not as fragile as I might appear, Duke. I'm beginning to see that, quote, he said, and something in his voice made her heart skip. The letter arrived the following week, delivered by a traveling merchant who had ridden up from the territorial capital. Charlotte recognized the expensive stationery immediately, and her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Asterisk Miss Whitmore asterisk, the letter began in Mrs. Ashford's precise script. Asterisk we have learned of your current situation through mutual acquaintances. While we bear you no ill will, we feel it our duty to inform your intended husband of the circumstances surrounding your departure from our employ. A woman of questionable character should not deceive an honest man. Charlotte's face went white as she read the veiled threats and implications. The Ashfords were offering to clarify her situation with Duke if she didn't return to Boston immediately. Bad news? Quote, Duke asked, noticing her distress. Charlotte quickly folded the letter, her mind racing. Just correspondence from my past. Nothing important. But that night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, Charlotte realized that her peaceful new life might not be as secure as she had hoped. The past, it seemed, was not willing to let her go so easily. The blizzard struck 3 weeks earlier than anyone expected, roaring down from the mountains with a fury that turned day into night. Charlotte woke to the sound of wind howling like a living thing, rattling the windows and sending snow spiraling past the glass in thick blinding sheets. Duke, quote, she called, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as she hurried from her room. She found him already dressed, standing at the kitchen window with a grim expression. It's bad, quote, he said without turning around. Worst storm I've seen this early in the season. We're going to be trapped here for days. Charlotte joined him at the window, gasping at the wall of white that had swallowed the landscape. She could barely make out the outline of the barn, though it stood only 50 yards from the house. The cattle, she began. Miguel and Pete got most of them into the lower pastures yesterday when we saw this coming. They're in the bunkhouse now, safe as we can make them. Duke's jaw tightened. But if this keeps up, we could lose everything. For 3 days, the storm raged without mercy. Charlotte and Duke found themselves confined to the main house, the world outside reduced to howling wind and endless snow. The forced intimacy broke down the careful politeness they had maintained, replacing it with something deeper and more honest. They took turns feeding the fire, sharing cooking duties, and reading aloud from Duke's collection of books. During the long evenings, with only lamplight to hold back the darkness, their conversations grew more personal than ever before. "I never told you about my inheritance," Charlotte said quietly on the second night as they sat before the fire. She had been wrestling with the decision since the Ashfords' letter arrived, but the storm had crystallized her resolve. "When my parents died, they left me a small sum. Not much, but perhaps enough to help with the ranch's difficulties." Duke's head snapped up from the ledger he had been studying. "What difficulties?" Charlotte felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I've seen the worry in your face, Duke. The way you study those books every night, the conversations that stop when I enter a room. I'm not blind to the signs of financial trouble." Duke set down his pencil and rubbed his temples. "The ranch is struggling, yes. Last winter was harder than expected, and we lost more cattle than we could afford. The banknote comes due in the spring, and I'm not sure." He trailed off, his pride warring with honesty. "Let me help," Charlotte said softly. "We're to be married. Your troubles are mine now. I won't take your money, Charlotte. I asked you to marry me, not to rescue me from my poor business decisions. And I didn't come here to be a burden," Charlotte replied, her voice gaining strength. "I came here to be a partner. Partners share both burdens and resources." Before Duke could respond, a tremendous crash echoed from outside, followed by the terrified lowing of cattle. Duke was on his feet instantly, grabbing his coat and hat. "The barn roof must have collapsed," he said grimly. "I have to get out there." "Duke, no." Charlotte caught his arm. "You can't see 10 feet in this storm. You'll die out there. And the cattle will die if I don't try." He gently but firmly removed her hand from his arm. "Some of those animals are pregnant. They're our future, Charlotte." Charlotte watched in terror as Duke disappeared into the white fury beyond the door. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. She paced the kitchen, starting at every sound, her imagination conjuring a dozen horrible fates. When she could bear it no longer, she bundled herself in every piece of warm clothing she could find and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and sending her staggering. "Duke!" She screamed, but the wind swallowed her voice. She fought her way toward where she thought the barn should be, following a rope Duke had strung between the buildings. She found him collapsed in the snow 20 feet from the house, his face blue with cold, barely conscious. Terror gave her strength she didn't know she possessed as she dragged him back to safety, half carrying, half pulling his larger frame through the drifts. Inside, she worked frantically to warm him, stripping away his frozen clothes and wrapping him in blankets by the fire. As feeling returned to his limbs, Duke's eyes found hers. "The cattle," he whispered. "Damn the cattle," Charlotte said fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I'd lost you." Duke's hand found hers, his grip weak but warm. "Charlotte, I love you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I know this started as an arrangement, but somewhere along the way, it became real for me. You became real for me." Duke struggled to sit up, his eyes never leaving her face. "I've been fighting it for weeks," he admitted, telling myself it was just gratitude, or loneliness, or practical necessity. "But when I was out there in the snow, all I could think about was getting back to you." Charlotte leaned forward, and Duke's hand cupped her cheek. "I need you, Charlotte. Not just for the ranch, not just for convenience. I need you." When their lips met, it was with the desperation of two people who had nearly lost everything that mattered. The storm still raged outside, but inside, by the warmth of the fire, Charlotte and Duke found something worth weathering any tempest to protect. Spring arrived like a benediction, melting away the last remnants of the brutal winter that had tested Charlotte and Duke's resolve. As the snow receded, it revealed a ranch that had not only survived, but somehow emerged stronger. The new barn Duke had managed to construct during a brief thaw in February stood solid and proud, housing the cattle that had made it through the harsh months. Charlotte stood on the porch, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly, watching Duke and Miguel repair winter damage to the fencing. 6 months had transformed her from a desperate governess into a woman who could birth a calf, preserve vegetables for winter storage, and manage ranch accounts with equal skill. Her hands were permanently stained and calloused now, her face touched by sun and wind, but her eyes held a contentment she had never known in Boston. "The preacher's here," quote, old Pete called from the yard, his leg fully healed and his spirits high. A small wagon approached, carrying not only Reverend Matthews, but also the Henderson family from the neighboring ranch and Sarah Chen, the schoolteacher from the nearest settlement. Today was their wedding day, a real ceremony to replace the hasty legal arrangement they had formalized during the winter. Charlotte smoothed her simple blue dress, the finest garment she owned, and felt Duke's presence behind her before he spoke. "Ready, Mrs. Blackwood?" Quote, he asked softly, using the name she had legally carried for months, but would now claim with her whole heart. "More than ready, Mr. Blackwood," quote, she replied, turning to face the man who had become her anchor in this wild country. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, conducted in the main room with their small community gathered around them. When Duke slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, one he had commissioned from a traveling metalsmith, Charlotte felt the final piece of her new life click into place. "I have something to show you," quote, Duke said after their guests had enjoyed Miguel's feast and the sun began to set. He led her to his study, where maps and documents covered his desk. "Remember your investment. The money you insisted on contributing." Quote, Charlotte nodded, still amazed that he had finally accepted her help after weeks of stubborn pride. "I didn't just use it to pay down the bank note," quote, Duke continued, his eyes bright with excitement. "I bought the adjoining section from the Millers when they decided to move back east. We now own twice the grazing land, and I've arranged contracts with 2 more buyers in Denver." Charlotte stared at the maps, seeing their property outlined in bold strokes. "Duke, this is enormous." "It's ours," quote, he said simply. "What we've built together." Charlotte took a deep breath, knowing it was time to share her own news. "Speaking of what we've built together," she placed his hand on her belly. "I have news of my own." Duke's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Charlotte, are you?" Quote, "The baby should arrive in late autumn," quote, she said, watching joy transform his features. "Dr. Morrison confirmed it when he came to check on Pete last week." Duke swept her into his arms, spinning her around the small room before setting her down gently, as if she were made of spun glass. "A baby," quote, he whispered. "Our baby." Later that evening, as the guests departed and the ranch settled into peaceful quiet, Charlotte and Duke walked hand in hand through their property. The mountains stood sentinel around them, no longer forbidding but protective, sheltering the life they had carved from wilderness and determination. "Do you ever regret it?" quote, Duke asked as they paused by the corral where horses nickered softly in the gathering dusk. "Leaving everything familiar for this uncertain life?" Quote, Charlotte considered the question seriously, thinking of the woman who had stepped off the train 6 months ago, desperate, afraid, with nothing but hope and a stranger's letters to sustain her. That woman seemed like someone from another lifetime. "Never," quote, she said firmly. "This life, this place, it's everything I never dared dream I could have." Duke pulled her close, and Charlotte marveled at how perfectly she fit against his side, how natural it felt to plan their future together. They spoke of expanding the house for their growing family, of the school they wanted to build for the scattered ranch children, of the legacy they would leave in this beautiful, demanding land. As stars emerged in the vast Montana sky, Charlotte reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had come west seeking escape from a life that was slowly killing her soul. Instead, she had found something infinitely more precious. A partnership built on mutual respect, a love that had grown from practical necessity into deep emotional bond, and a future bright with possibility. In Duke's arms, surrounded by the land they had claimed together, Charlotte Blackwood knew she was finally, truly home.